Amelia agrees to become the king's mistress, but only if he will let her take part in the painting of this series. But she plans to never have that portrait completed. So it's a way of kind of defying his authority.
A work of the imagination?
A work of the imagination, but inspired by an article that I read actually on the website Atlas Obscura. I'm not sure if you know that. It's a curiosity cabinet, an online curiosity cabinet. So if you like history, learning little fascinating tidbits of history, you'll love that website. And there was a writer who had written an article about this portrait series, and she described them as the 17th century version of Maxim's Hot 100, which, if you remember, was kind of gross. I don't think it exists anymore, thankfully. But it was where they ranked all the women according to their looks, and so these women were sort of ranked. But they were also the series was also interestingly commissioned by a woman, Anne Hyde, and she was the king's sister-in-law. So I wanted to explore why she might have commissioned a series of these sort of mistresses and these courtiers, and whether she was giving them power or taking it away.
You've got me. Kate Forsyth wrote her first novel at age 7, as we mostly do, and is now the internationally best-selling author of 50 books. I thought that might have been a typo, but no, it's not. 50 books for adults and children, including Bitter Greens and The Crimson Thread, and so many more. Her new book out just last week is called Psykhe, with a K. And as we said, it's her 50th. So it's a particularly celebratory book, is it not? It is. And it's a mesmerising novel about gods and mortals. And for me, it's a bit of a departure from a lot of your work. We're looking at myths, which I suppose in themselves are partly fairy tales. And it's quite a complicated. Oh, I can't say the word. This is on the hop. It's a more thoughtful. It's a very thoughtful work of re-examining this well-known legend. Why tackle that, Kate?
I'm being asked that a lot. I don't think it's a real departure from my work. I think that all of my work draws together history and wonder tales. I try and take old stories and turn them into something new and surprising. Psyche is often called the first fairy tale. It is a myth of the Greco-Roman tradition. It's the only myth in which a young woman is at its heart, and in which she is not turned into a cow or a tree, or have her hair turned into a nest of hissing snakes, or is reduced to nothing more than a plaintive voice echoing men. This is a gynocentric myth. It's ancient. It's at least 2,500 years old, but has remnants of older matriarchal myths encoded within it. And that's what drew it to me. I have always loved myth and fairy tales and wonder tales of all types. But I'm particularly interested in stories about women. So the best known version of this story was written by a man. His name was Lucius Apuleius, and he wrote in the 2nd century AD, by which time this story was at least 400 to 600 years old already. In the heart of his story, Psyche is a bit of a weak and weepy girl, always kind of drooping and weeping. And when she is taken to this palace where the god of desire comes to visit her, she is terrified. She's vulnerable. She has no power over her life, no power over her body, no power to choose what's going to happen to her. While the fairy tale, The Snake Prince, which was collected in Greece from the old tradition, it's very much the Beauty and Beast tale that you all know. But in the heart of that story, the young woman, the need for her to give consent is absolutely crucial. And the Snake Prince, her husband, beast husband, every night says, "Will you go to bed with me?" And every night she says, "No, I do not know you. I'm afraid of you. I want to go home." And she only gives her consent to him at the very end of the story, when all power has been returned to her, including the power of life and death over that beast husband. So my version is a winding together of the myth and the fairy tale, Psyche and Beauty and the Beast.
And if any of you have heard Kate before, you know that she's a master storyteller. And I sort of find myself just listening a little bit, mouth open, and then thinking, hang on, you're interviewing this one, Suzanne. Off you go. So, 3 historical fiction writers, and if you count me, 4. It's a very popular type of reading. Readers are very loyal and love historical fiction. Melissa, why do you think that is generally? What is the pull of historical fiction?
I think part of it is, well, for me, in a way, we can avoid the contemporary world, making sense of the contemporary world as writers, which is ever-changing and can be very confusing. So for me, I'm just interested in the stories of women who have been forgotten, and that's my drive, to pull them out and explore their lives. And I'm particularly interested in European stories. So I think that's where it comes from for me.
But what struck me as well with your body of work is that it's not just generally women, it's women and the natural world, or women and the world of science. Tell me where that interest comes from.
Yeah, so my first book, The Birdman's Wife, was inspired. I was a bird watcher, and I read this biography of John Gould, the father of Australian ornithology, and I found out that Elizabeth Gould, his wife, had sort of really was responsible in a way for his great success with his, the Birds of Australia and his wonderful monographs, because she was his artist for the first 11 years of the business. And in the biography, she was just really this shadowy person, and I just sort of fell in love with her, and I just wanted to know more about her. So what I've sort of been doing with my works of historical fiction is interested in someone who's really quite powerful, like Maria Sibylla Merian as well, and then finding somebody that is associated with them and then exploring that person, I suppose, and bringing them out. So they really existed, but they aren't well enough known so that I can have an adventure discovering them and imagining them back to life.
Thank you.
I don't know if I answered that question.
You did. That was
I think you did. So I've known of Lauren Chater's books for a while, works for a while, but I think if I'm remembering this correctly, Lauren and I first met in 2020 when we both had books out. I don't know, I can't remember what your delivery date was, but, or publication date. Mine was the 1st of April 2020. You might remember that as being the first day of the national lockdown. So I'd sort of, the book's Deceptions, and I'd run into they got it into Big W and Target, but we weren't really allowed to go shopping at all unless you were going for toilet paper, as you might remember. And so I'd sort of run in, look at this book everywhere. I was the only one in the shop, and run out again. Am I remembering that correctly, Lauren? Is that how it began?
Yes, I think so, yeah. Both our books were out on the same day, because I'm always the 1st of April as well.
And tell me, just before we move on to the new book,
Yeah.
I love Gulliver's Wife, and there seems to be a little bit of a theme between the 3 of you of taking well-known characters and recreating or examining more closely the story. So just really quickly about Gulliver's Wife, because I always associate that with you.
Gulliver's Wife. Yeah, so my second novel, Gulliver's Wife, came out in lockdown, and I was talking to booksellers a couple of weeks ago because I was on tour in Brisbane, and this woman said, I will always remember your book, but it was the last event that we did before we went into lockdown. So it wasn't even out yet. It was like a pre-sale event, bookseller event. But so it was a strange experience to sort of release into that world. But it's the story of Gulliver's wife. So when he comes home and he's sort of raving and mad and talking about all these little people, his poor wife Mary, who's been left behind and is assumed that he's dead, has to her whole world is thrown upside down again because she now has to kind of figure out whether he's telling the truth or whether he's really mad. And she's a midwife. So my mum's a midwife, and I wanted to put a lot of that into the story because I think it was really fascinating history of midwifery, and obviously, a history that hasn't been as closely examined or as held up as sort of as credible as sort of surgery and the more male-dominated fields. But these women had a lot of power back then in the 17th century. They had their own training methods, they had apprentices, and they had knowledge that they shared between each other, which was the most powerful way to survive in that patriarchal system at the time. And Mary has a young daughter, Bess, who are based on my own daughter. She was only sort of 8 or 9 at the time, but she was so sassy, and I just knew that in a few years' time she was going to be like Bess. So I drew a lot on that mother and daughter relationship as well.
Thank you. And moving on to the Beauties, so you've continued to write historical fiction. What keeps you going back, and what do you think keeps readers coming back for more historical fiction?
There's a ghost in the room.
Fix that one up. I think it's just a really fascinating kind of way of looking at the past, and we have this distance that where we're able to kind of examine things that have happened without that immediate kind of placing ourselves in the story, and that's what people love about historical fiction. They're able to kind of take a step back from the real world, as Melissa pointed out, and escape into the past. But it's also a way of, I think, finding that magic in the everyday. Like, we're so busy running around doing all the things that we do, we lose that touch with that magic. And there's so much magic in the world, and through history, we find all these fascinating little stories and strange kind of tales and eccentric connections between people, and so that's what really draws me to writing about history, and I find it fascinating. I just think there's so much in there, and also the way that patterns replay. So this at the end of the Beauties, the plague comes in, and I was thinking about the pandemic, of course, and drawing on those strange experiences that we had. Was so bizarre, but for these people, they were just living their lives and dealing with things as they happened, and so for us, I think it's a really good way of thinking about the world and being able to orient ourselves in it without getting too caught up in our day-to-day lives.
So really what it is, it's fiction on steroids. So not only do you get to escape in general fiction, but you get to escape into fiction and into the past.
That's right.
So Kate, with your knowledge of 50 books behind you, and the majority would be historical. You've done books for adults, for children, you've done non-fiction. What keeps you coming back to historical fiction?
I have always loved books set long, long ago and far, far away. Right from the very time that I was first reading, they were the books that most captured my imagination. I think that historical fiction is absolutely crucial. I think the only way that we can imagine how to change the world for the better is to know what the world once was, and to see how far we have come, how much change we have managed to create over years. And then I think what it dissolves is this a sense of hopelessness, where people go, well, what's the point of even trying to change the world? Things have always been the same. Things will always be the same. There's no point even trying. And what historical fiction does is it teaches us that this is not true. One of my books is called Beauty in Thorns, and it's about the women of the Pre-Raphaelite circle of artists and poets in Victorian Britain. One of the young women I was writing about is called Margaret Burne-Jones, and she was born on the 3rd of June 1866, and I was born on the 3rd of June 1966. So there's exactly 100 years between us. I was able to go to university. In fact, I've got 3 university degrees. Margot was not. I am permitted to vote. Margot was not. I can go out and about in the world because there are public lavatories for women. Margot could not. I could go on telling you all the things that Margot could not do, but I also want to point out to the fact that she had a brother who was gay, and at the time that he was a young man, it was still punishable by a very long prison death and even death. So when I was writing Beauty and Thorns, I became acutely aware of how incredibly lucky I am to be a woman born in this time, to be born now, and also acutely aware of how hard we have to fight not to lose what we have already won. And so that's why I love historical fiction, that's why I write it, because I fully intend to change the world with my art.
Hooray. There may be an opening if you were to change nationality between now and November. I think perhaps we could do with some alternative candidates. But matter for you, Kate. I'll leave that one with you. One of the hardest things, I think, for writers of historical fiction is how do you balance fact and fiction? Fact heavy gets a bit chewy. Too much fiction, and you risk losing the what's important about the history itself. Do you have any methods as to how you balance that? Melissa?
That's such a huge question. I think that for me it is different depending on the different books that I've written, and then also as a writer, I'm writing my fourth work of historical fiction at the moment, and I've found my relationship to that question evolving. But for example, with the Naturalist of Amsterdam, Maria Sibylla Merian, the woman who inspired the book, has been with me for about 10 years. So I first found out about her when I was writing The Birdman's Wife, and these are her beautiful artworks. Ugh. These are the works that she did, and so they were published in 1705, and they're still, really contemporary. They don't look like antiquated natural history prints or anything like that. So I knew that I wanted to write about her, but I couldn't find a way into her story, and so I wrote another book, and she just, kept sitting with me, and I did lots of research into her life. I found out, all sorts of things about her, but there's quite a bit of information about her. So she has letters, she's mentioned in correspondence with various other scientists. She has she published about 5 books, so you can go and look at those. And so she wouldn't leave me, like she was just with me, and I was, how am I going to write her story? And so I kept reading, and I found out that she had these 2 daughters who she trained as artists in her studio. She was a really unusual person, Maria. She, for example, they lived in Amsterdam, and if you're a woman in Amsterdam, you couldn't run a business unless you were a widow, and so she pretended that her husband was dead. Before then, she'd actually left her husband, and in order to leave her husband, she'd joined this doomsday cult, and she sort of wouldn't let him join the cult. But she was, very, very determined to run her business, to have her career as a scientist and an artist. And so she trained her daughters to have all of her skills. And she actually conceived of her books. So she designed the plates, she scientifically observed the behaviour of the insects. She drew them, she etched them, she had them printed, and she sold the books at home. So she did the whole process, and that was about 5 different careers that she had there doing that. Trained her daughters to do that. So for me, I'm really interested in family firms, and so that was just a way in to look at Maria. But I found a book about that, and I found out that her daughters, had worked on some of her illustrations as well. But I still sort of didn't have enough material to write about her. Like, I still couldn't do it. And then finally I found another book so Dorothea, my main character, after her mother died, so she sort of got her legacy and stitched up her work, sold it, had it preserved. Then she took a job with Peter the Great, and she moved to St. Petersburg. And I found this book called The Paper Museum, and it was all about this life that Dorothea had after her mother's death. She got married again. At the age of 40, she had 5 children, between 40 and 45. So she just had this whole other life after her kind of quite difficult life with her mother. And that just was the final piece of material I needed in order to have that transformation of the facts into the fiction. So it's a huge process, I guess. And so you find the story within the research that you do.
And I think what's clever about that too is that you find a story that has pieces of the jigsaw already there, but then what you're looking for is the absence, because then that can be your character. So you get Dorothea, who has had little written about her and who's more of a blank slate. Or clean slate. How about you, Lauren?
Well, I had 2 sort of sources of real inspiration. I had the first one was, so I was writing about Anne Hyde, and she was obviously the king's sister-in-law. She was actually a very fascinating character from royal history, because not much has been written about her. She died of cancer when she was 36, but she was actually the mother of queens, and she was the mother of Queen Anne, who some of you might remember from The Favourite. Not the best kind of version of Queen Anne, but a very real one probably. So Anne Hyde was a very interesting character, and she commissioned this portrait series. And when I was trying to find her voice, I found a little diary that had been archived and digitised in Project Gutenberg, an online resource. And it was a diary that she'd written when she was 12. Oh, wow. And just reading it, I felt so connected to her. And it was so cute because they'd left, her family fled. They fled England during the Civil War, and they ended up in Holland, in the Netherlands, which is where she ended up meeting her future husband, the king's brother. But in her diary, she said, I miss my Aunt Bab so terribly, Aunt Barbara, her Aunt Barbara, who she loved and who had died the previous winter. I miss her so much, and I wish she'd come to the Netherlands. It's so boring here. Everybody just sits around and talks about the war, and I probably won't write in this diary again, but maybe I will. I think it's really cute, and I got it for my birthday. And when I read that, I thought it just reminded me of my daughter so much. It was like talking across time, like this little voice talking across time, and I just thought it was so beautiful. And I think finding those, I know it's harder the further back we go, but finding those first-hand sources can really help you tap into the voice of that character, And I was reading her as a 12-year-old, but then writing her as a girl in her teens, late teens. So that was really amazing. I loved that.
And isn't there that eureka moment, like finding something really great in an op shop? When you're looking online and you find the diary. So just really quickly, and then I'll ask Kate. But I'm working on a historical book for kids that's set in France during the Second World War. And as you would know with historical fiction, you can find out all the important details about important people, but it's the day-to-day stuff that you need to know for fiction. So you need to know, in my case, what the school situation was like, what trains were being taken, what tickets look like, and every now and then you just find that thing. So I found there's this one woman called Hannah Schramm who wrote a diary, but you couldn't find it anywhere. There's nowhere in Australia, there's nowhere overseas, and there's this tiny, like a shop where the memorial camp is in France, and they have an online shop. And they had it.
There you go. Yeah.
Kate, back to you.
Research.
Yes, research, fact, fiction. How do you make the balance? Or research, if you'd like.
Well, they're kind of linked, aren't they?
Yeah.
So I love to research, which is lucky since I'm a historical novelist. Research is simply reading with a purpose. I always start my stories from a place of complete and utter ignorance, because I know nothing about the time or place that I'm writing about. I'm not one of these authors whose books are always set in the same place and time. And I'm drawn to that place and time because of the story, not the other way around. How I go about it is I read absolutely everything that I can find. I research to find my story. I research to understand the psyche of my characters. I research to understand how they lived, how they loved, how they worked, what they longed for, what they were afraid of. I research in order to project myself into the skin of my characters. And I try and learn everything that I need to know, internalize it, and then forget it. So I'm writing, instead of doing my research and then seeing how I can work it into the story, I learn everything that I can, and then I put the research away, and I try and write from inside the skin of my characters. I now know them so well. I've inhabited so much, they've inhabited me so much that I'm writing from inside them. And so that's how I do it. I don't think of research as being, you research this and then you see how you can work it into the story. The story has to arise absolutely intuitively and naturally out of what you have learnt in your journey towards understanding that time and place.
It's interesting. I was running with Eleanor Lemprich, who's written that beautiful book called The Coast and other historic books. Isn't it gorgeous? It's and she was talking about Lauren Groth, who I think was at Sydney Writers' Festival, and apparently the way she writes is that she writes longhand. Help me. I mean, if I had to write longhand with my writing, and then when she's finished the longhand, she throws it out. And she starts again, which is sort of what you're saying, I think, Kate, is it not? I mean, only it's not being written, but it's in your head. Maybe your head's bigger and can keep it all in.
Well, I'm a notebooker, so each book that I write, I fill notebooks up with thoughts, feelings, questions. I take extremely intensive notes while I'm researching. I have a very visual imagination, so I'm always searching for maps and diagrams and images of what I'm writing about. I have it's almost like method writing. So I will listen to the music that my characters would have listened to. I eat the food that they would have cooked and eaten. I try very hard to understand what their everyday life would have been like. I write myself into the character and then write the book out of the character.
So just in terms of a logistical issue, so you're saying you write longhand notebooks, and those notebooks are your Bible for when you need to check something when you're writing from the internal perspective of the character. Is that what you do, Melissa?
I seem to write differently for each book, and every time I start a book, I think, I know what I'm doing now, and I've figured it all out, and I know how to make the process happen more quickly, but it's never, ever like that. And so for me, each book kind of has to figure out how to write the book as I'm writing it. So the book, I've just finished the first draft of my latest book, and I've written it really differently to the other books that I wrote, where I do lots of research. Like I sort of start my research when I finish the current book, and it's gone off to my agent and the publisher, and it goes through quite a process before it lands on the bookshelves. And so then I start researching for my new book, and I can keep reading about all of the different elements that I need to find out about the period, what my character's career was and everything. I might do a couple of years of research into that, and then I sort of start to find... Sorry, I've lost my train of thought there.
So how you're researching and for this new book that you've just finished?
Yes. So I sort of had this slow process of researching, and then I'd go and write the book, and I'd sort of do some research as I was writing as well. But for my latest book, I did my research, and then I wrote the first draft of my historical fiction in 3 months, which is something I've never, ever done before. Like, that book there took me 18 months to write the first draft. I'm very embarrassed to admit it took that long, but it was a very clean draft when I finished it, and then my publisher said, throw 30,000 words in the bin and write another 30,000 words. So that didn't work. So that's why I'm trying a new way of writing this book now. So I wrote this really rough first draft that I'd researched, but I put it all aside. I didn't look at any of my notes, and then I've done this really heavy structural edit, I suppose, and then I'm just about to start in a few weeks. So I'm going to start, it'll kind of be my third draft, and it's like the same. I'm just going to write it all over again. So I'm just going to start all over again. I'm not going to look at I've written all over the old draft, And yeah, so I don't know if that'll work. I mean, my publisher might say, no, change this, that and the other, which they always say anyway. But yes, I'm always sort of trying to figure out the way, but there is no way for me. It's whatever that book requires, I guess.
So are you saying that you're writing longhand at first?
Oh, no, not longhand, no.
Yeah,
but I do have notebooks as well, so I sort of have a little diary, but then I also have notebooks, and I've been keeping them since I was 11, and so that's kind of like a practical book about my ideas that I have as I have them about that particular book. And then I have many, many files on my computer, but I write on my computer. Yeah.
Excellent. And I think what was interesting about talking about being a writer, and I think everyone here has written a number of books, perhaps not 50, but maybe one of us has. And what I think I've learned, which I think is what you were saying, Melissa, is that when you start a new book, you don't know how to write that book, but all I know is that I've managed to finish it before, so chances are I'll be able to finish this. And that's actually quite a solace, really, because you think, okay, look, it's because those first drafts can be awful, and you think it'll never finish, but history has it, and we are, of course, historical readers and writers, that it's happened before.
It's anxiety-inducing, isn't it?
No.
No.
So research. Tell me about your research, Lauren.
And the writing, the process. So I must confess that I'm not like Kate and Melissa. I'm a terrible notebook buyer, but then I don't write in them. You know that meme where they're like, "You do not need another notebook." That's me. That was directed at me because I love them. They're so beautiful, and then I just go off and just write the draft myself in my computer. But I have done that before, where I've completely dumped a draft and just rewritten the whole thing from scratch. But it is good because you have the it's like impressionist painting. You have the kind of idea in your head, but you're just making it better. In that second draft. But with this one, I had 6 months off work, so I didn't do any other work, and I just worked on it every day. And I do love that. If you can do that, I think, because you can stay in the story, it's so much easier to, arrive at your desk every day just knowing what you've got to do. You don't have any other distractions. But that's not always how life goes, is it? We've got to have paid work. We've got kids. We've got lives. So that's why it's so hard to write a book. I think if we didn't have any of that other stuff, we could easily just sit down and it would be amazing to just write.
So you were saying in 6 months full time you wrote that?
Yes, I wrote this.
Wow.
Yeah.
So first draft, second draft, the whole shebang?
10 months for the whole shebang, really, with the whole...
And are you a sort of a Kevin Rudd sleeper? Or are you a...
What was that, sorry?
Are you a Kevin Rudd sleeper, which is sort of 4 hours a night?
The 4 hours a night. Yeah, I don't sleep a lot. I get up at 5, go to the gym, do my running, come back, drop the kids off, and then just bam, right to the computer for a couple of hours. Yeah, I think when you've got young kids, you don't have a choice. You just fit it in wherever you can, really.
I mean, in a way, it's the incentive that doesn't wait for the muse, does it?
That's right.
Because the muse might come at school time and
yes,
it's too
I know,
late.
Which is why, thankfully, we have our phone with the notes. So that's what I have instead of a notebook. I have my phone, and I've got the notes section in my phone. Yeah, the modern mum's notebook.
When we talk about historical fiction, there are a lot of things that readers are getting out of historical fiction. So immersing yourself in a novel, being educated about the time, and shedding a life on our lives now through the past. Now, some writers can be seen to be didactic, and you can see quite clearly that the role has been to educate. Where does that figure in your writing? Is your goal to educate at all? Kate?
I love to learn, which is one of the reasons why I love to read and write historical fiction. The act of learning something that I never knew before thrills me. Is my goal to educate? It isn't my goal, it's a lovely side effect, as it were. My primary goal is always to transport my reader, to give to them what is the great gift of narrative fiction, and that is a sense that they have been out of their body for a period of time. It's a very Zen-like thing. No matter what's going on in your life, no matter how hard your life might be or how much pain or sorrow you are carrying, you open up the pages of a book and then you step through that gateway, and for a period of time you're living another life in another place, you're in someone else's skin, and everything that you experience in the world of the book, all the challenges that you conquer, all your triumphs, all the empowerment that you gain, you bring back into your own life. And so you return to your own body and your own world, possibly even transfigured by the experiences that you've had within the world of the book. That, I think, is the great gift of fiction. I think that's why most of us read, and that's what I want to give to my readers. If I educate them along the way, then that's an added a bonus. But what I really want to do is help you be transfigured.
And obviously the proof is in the pudding, and if we think back to COVID, rather than the screens obviously were important, but the printed word came back and fiction came back. Not all fiction obviously, but was sort of comfort reading for a lot of people. But it was interesting that disappearance was important for people, because we needed to get out of our heads.
So important, and I'd just like to add a little bit to that, if I may. That's what I love about books so much, is that the book, a novel, is a co-creation between me, the writer, and you, the reader. You bring your intelligence, your imagination, your life experience, your own brilliance to the page. And without you, that book does not live. When you are watching a film, for example, and don't get me wrong, I love film or TV, so much of the work is done for you. The sound, the music, the actors who tell you what to feel. In a book, you have to do, your brain is like a ball of electric fire, because everything that you see or think or feel is being delivered to you by the decoding of small black marks on a white page. And that makes your brain never works as hard as it does when you are reading. And that is why books are so, so, so important to us all.
Hear, hear. Melissa, did you have an election speech that you could give us now? So I suppose what I'm asking for you is, yes, so education as a goal of the writer. What's your goal as a writer, and if you've got more priorities, how would you rank them?
So my goal isn't to educate, but I'm really interested in just knocking back myths, I think, that we have about women. And, you know, we've had our dominant stories, the dominant way that, you know, we've had history told by often, you know, privileged white men. And we're at a time in our culture at the moment where all these other stories, we have this real thirst and this interest in other voices that haven't been able to tell how they experienced life and how things felt for them, to give us their perspective. And women, half the population, their voices have been silenced. So I am particularly interested in these women who really, really existed, and I really want to turn over those myths that we women haven't contributed to our culture. I can remember this being taught something in the 90s when I was at university. I was studying psychology, and we were looking at intelligence, and they said in terms of the bell curve, men were the outliers on the bell curve with intelligence, so they were sort of super intelligent or sort of, you know, super challenged, and then women were in the middle of the bell curve, and there was this idea that women are kind of mediocre and average and everything. And I took that in, and I think that we sort of had these beliefs about women at the time, that women are not quite as good as men. And I'm in my 50s, and I sort of, looking back, I'm sort of unpacking that for myself now as a woman. And I think that that's what I want to do with my historical fiction, which is to challenge those internalised ideas that we have, that our culture's given us about what women can do, and show readers that women always contributed, and here's this amazing woman, and here's this incredible woman, and they made really, really important contributions to, for me, it's often art and science, which are two areas that have been really difficult for women to succeed in. We caught a woman who does a podcast about women in art, and apparently today, art by women sells for 1/10 of the price of art by men. So, for example, Georgia O'Keeffe painting sold for $40 million, and then a Salvador Dali one sold for $400 million. So, so there's lots of work to do, and there's women have obviously been wonderful artists. There's no difference in a man and a woman's brains. It's just these ideas that we've been brought up, but we're in a place where it's all being broken apart. That's the conversation, and there's just this thirst to find out about it and to read about it.
And I think, Melissa, when you talked about showing, I mean, for all the emerging writers or established writers in the audience, there's that the rule, show, don't tell. And that's what I think you're all saying, that you're giving a picture of something to the reader to then interpret. Would that be right?
So we're writing fiction rather than we're telling the historical story of it?
Yeah, I think so, yes. In terms of the same knowledge is given in a different way that perhaps allows the reader more for their imagination to work harder. Lauren, how about you?
Yeah, well, I suppose the same as Kate and Melissa, my goal is not to overtly educate, but more to share the sort of interesting things that we've discovered about history, and also to foster that curiosity, that ongoing curiosity that drives us all to read stories and to share stories. I like to set my books in foreign places. So my first book is set in Estonia, and then A Gulliver's Wife is in London, and then The Winter Dress in the Netherlands, and then The Beauties back in London and the Netherlands. And, my other reasoning is to give you an excuse to travel to these places where you can see these beautiful paintings and see this extraordinary dress, which was the subject of the last book. I'm really interested in artefacts and from history, and how, they speak to us across time, and they tell the stories of these people, and we can still feel sort of close to them because they still exist, thankfully. And we can discover more about ourselves by reading these stories. And I also love to just talk about books. Like, I think part of the motivation of being a writer is actually just to fangirl over other people's books and be really embarrassing and say embarrassing questions when you meet your author, mentors and stuff. So that's a really nice side effect of writing as well, just sharing the love of story, I think.
We've got about 10 minutes to go, which means it's time for you, our audience, to ask what you've been wanting to ask. We've got questions everywhere. There we go. We've got 1, 2, 3.
Oh, hello. Lauren, this is for you because I've just recently finished listening to the audiobook of The Beauties.
Oh, amazing.
And loved Blazy Best's rendition, if anybody does enjoy listening to audiobooks.
Excellent. I've heard that. Yeah, someone else.
She's incredible.
Yeah, cool.
I wanted to actually talk about the group of the women's theatrical company in your book.
Yeah.
I loved hearing that adventure and the hope and the in that time of having this together. Is that based on anything you found in history, or is this a hopeful look back?
Yeah, no, so it was based on an article I read in The Guardian, which was about a theatre group, and this theatre had burnt down in the early 1600s, and then at the start of the Restoration period, this group of women got together and they invested in this theatre, and they turned it into sort of a women's only theatre. And Restoration theatre was really interesting because it was the first time that women had been able to act on stage. Charles II, who we know as the Merry Monarch, he loved women. He loved them so much that he wanted to see them on stage for the first time and see their ankles, which was very risque. So he allowed women to act on the stage for the first time. And I just thought it was so cool that these women had gotten together and, and created that system for themselves. And some of them were carpenters and, widows. But what entrepreneurship to be able to do that. And I loved that, that collegial kind of attitude, which inspires me. I'm inspired by my writer friends, we're always getting together to gossip on me and talk about books and things like that.
Now, I think there were 2 questions down here and down here. So one with the woman in red. Should make a song.
Thank you. Mine's a very maybe boring practical question. I'm not a writer, I'm a reader. When you write, it was interesting to hear about how you write, but when you write, do you write chapters from beginning to end, or do you write a chapter and then it moves, or do you write the end first, or does it just depend?
Yes, and yes. Yeah. Basically. Yeah.
Does anyone want to say something specific about that?
Yeah. I'll go first, shall I?
Yeah.
So, in general, I do like to write in a fairly linear fashion because I'm interested in my character's journey of change and transformation. But I'm discovering the story while I'm writing it, and often I write things that are later completely cut and thrown out. I was thinking about you. I've had to cut more than 30,000 words out of a novel. I know how much it hurts. And sometimes I think I've got a structure which is going to work, and then it doesn't work on the page, and so I restructure the whole story. I've also written a whole novel in first person, decided it didn't work, so rewrote the entire novel in multiple third person. So basically, you just write, and if I'm stuck, I'll often leave that scene and jump forward to another scene, just so I can keep the creative energies going.
Oh, yeah, so I do write chapter to chapter, but very similar to what Kate's saying. Then you have your first draft and then you come back and do the structural edit. So you're looking at, actually maybe it should, that this chapter's in the wrong place or this scene's in the wrong place. So it's very much a problem solving what's going on with the story, and you are definitely discovering the story as you're writing it and deepening it and finding out more important information about the character. That's kind of, as the novel is drafted and everything, it sort of becomes more complicated, and everything of the story comes out and finalises.
Yeah, I think that the thing is there are no shortcuts, and we all want a shortcut. Like we all want, that one thing to just go, oh, you just zip from here to the end, but it never happens, does it? So we just have to write our way through it, and then inevitably you have to redraft, or you have to lose 30,000 words or 100,000 words. It doesn't matter though, because the end product is the important thing.
I think I'd sort of just give two specific or tips, or at least what works for me. I teach these writing better judgment courses with a group of judges and other writers, which is about for new judges to make their writing more accessible, more issues based. And they have writers to make, I suppose, the course a bit sexy, and it makes it interesting. So I've just been writing a talk for this next one, and I've decided that for me, my favourite word is bridge in capital letters. So when you don't know where you're going, you just put a bridge in capital letters, you hop over it and you start elsewhere. And I think it just unblocks you. The other thing I use is Scrivener, which is a software package which has a which has a line down the left-hand side with a whole lot of files, which means that you can just move them around really easily. I mean, visually you can change the chapters as they do or don't work. Do you want to add something?
I was just going to say that I just put in a little row of two little asterisks, and so I can search through my whole document and find things that I have not yet done. So I'll write a very short précis of what I think needs to go here, and sometimes I just need more time to think about it. It needs more time kind of stewing in my subconscious.
We had a question down the front. Thank you.
There was some talk about you writing books for people to read, but a lot of us, or some of us, listen to books now. So when you write the book, do you ever think of writing it for somebody to listen to? And when it comes to choosing the person who reads the book, do you have a selection there, or do you think you should read your own books? Thank you.
I am very grateful not to read my own books. Apart from anything else, I have every speech impediment known, and it would be a very long and painful process. I do often read my own author note though. I'm usually sent a selection of audio grabs, and I listen to them and choose the narrator from that.
I would love to read my own book. Nobody has ever asked me. Maybe they should get onto that. No, but the lady that I had two options as well, and the one that did the lady that did the audiobook, Blazy Best, she was fantastic. So as soon as I heard her, I knew that she would do a good job. But I think we all have an internal narrator as we're writing, and I think we all, that voice, if you can hear that in the person that's doing the audiobook narration, that's a winner. Yeah.
People always say that they can hear my voice when they're reading.
Oh yeah, I hear your voice when I'm reading. Yeah, it's like you're reading me a story. Bedtime story.
I think we live in such a wonderful age with the growth of audiobooks. My daughter is low vision, and so she can't read in a conventional way. And so I don't think I write with the in terms of an audio way, but I think that people have to think about that now, because that's so many people, take their reading through an audiobook. And I don't read my own book, so the same thing. They audition the people who are going to read it, and then I get to listen to snippets of the book being read by different voice actors, which is always so much fun. It's like really, it's a nice part of the process.
I think another thing about audiobooks that came as a surprise to me is, and I don't know about everyone else, but when I've finished a book and it's published, I don't like reading it again, because you're reading for mistakes or reading for only if or what you did. But you need to remember your book, because when you're on panels, you need to know what to talk about. And So for The Watchful Wife and The Deceptions, I've got two really excellent female narrators, Zoe Caritas and Anthea Greco. And the great thing is, you listen to your own book being read by someone else, and it becomes not your book anymore. So you can actually enjoy it. And I sort of found myself listening to it and thinking, oh, this is interesting. And because, you get to enjoy it because it's at a distance, I think.
That's right. Well, Anna Downs, she's an amazing author, and you read your own book, didn't you, Anna?
Yes,
what was it like?
All of the... Is it just The Safe Place or Shadow House or...
Sorry.
Sorry to
dob you in
get
it.
up on stage.
Big plug for Anna Downs' new book was out last week, 2 weeks ago.
It was April 30th, so it's been out
April
a month.
30th.
Red River Road.
There we go. Have you got a copy there, Anna?
I haven't. I read the entirety of The Safe Place, which was my debut, and I also narrated half of The Shadow House, because there were two POVs, so we got a voice actor in to do one of them, and I did the other one. I'm a trained actor, so it did feel natural to me, and I certainly do factor into how not just how it looks on the page, but how it sounds as well. The latest book, Red River Road, really needed a natural native Australian accent, so I did not do that one.
I didn't know that.
Well, you don't want me doing this all the way through a novel, do you? But that was really interesting to listen to, and I agree with you, Suzanne, that it does kind of turn it into a whole different thing, and it makes it much more palatable to revisit. You're kind of like, oh, that's not a bad book. That's quite a good sentence. No, it's nice. It's a good experience though, and if Lauren, if you do want to do it, it is just the most joyful, wonderful experience. I can't recommend it highly enough. Thanks.
And I think just a last comment about the audiobooks. A lot of authors are now being asked to write for Audible, so just writing specifically for an audiobook, and then perhaps later having that put into print. So I was speaking to Ashley Kalajian-Blunt yesterday, and she's doing one of those. A lot of crime writers I know of doing them. I'm not sure if historical fiction's the same.
Too much work.
Too much work, there you go. And I think on that note, too much work, we'll let you go home to enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.